Also, since while I'm on the topic, I've come to actually, broadly speaking, hate the whole fucking uh, entirety of classical romance at this point. It's not really just Wuthering Heights. I think when I get into this, if I get into this disdain for this style of romantic writing, I would say that it's been going on for a long time, and that unfortunately, it also would veer into territory of Romeo and Juliet, which also strikes me as another stupid book that is flawed or play that is flawed in a lot of the same ways that Wuthering Heights happens to be flawed. So, the more that I, unfortunately, I'm not the kind of reader that can turn my brain off, and turn off the critical analysis part of my being. So, when I think about these stories, I think about when I think about a classical romance story. I had this one teacher that was absolutely obsessed with making us read these fucking Greek tragedies, and this is one of the books that she made us go over. I took to it pretty quickly. I understood, and I also had to understand that wherefore meant, why, not where. I had to go for the more sophisticated understanding of Juliet pitying herself because of the fact that the two families did not like each other and the whole thing. But when I look back on it, it's like at the end of this story, they're just two hormonal teenagers that meet, get married in secret, and then one fakes her own death to avoid marrying Paris, and then Romeo kills himself, seeing this because he didn't know what's going on, and then she kills herself. Like this is a this is a tragedy that we're seeing unfold here, and I think if I were to make a statement about Wuthering Heights, I would say that I happen to know one thing about the classical period that doesn't really come up a lot in discussions, but even in westernized societies, and America, the United States, England, and European cultures, marriages were not always and eternally for the sake of love. And in fact, the conservatives of an old time period would be saying, marriages should be based on, be arranged, and families should do these for the sake of something else, like land rights, or to resolve feuds between blood feuds, or territory, or all these other things that they would base this stuff on. And even the terms that you get, like love child, refer to children of these are old terms, these are archaic terms that would refer to somebody that was conceived out of a man has a mistress that he's actually in love with, and has a child with her, outside of the marriage that was basically a marriage of convenience, of some kind, that happened in it. And when I look back at novels like Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and I rewind the clock back that far, and I look back at Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, what I see out of classical romance is that it almost always, in the end, ends up being a cautionary tale of self-destruction, and and or of the destruction of other people, because one or more characters has fallen into a state of what the Greeks, with their three forms of love, would call, eros, which is eroticized love. So he falls into this, and this trap. And every time we see a classical author, take up the pen of eroticized love, they almost always end up penning a tragedy that is a cautionary, that ends up serving as a cautionary tale that basically suggests that the throes of passion inside love, eroticized love, will drive you to self-destruction, and or possibly the destruction of others, as Heathcliff, destroyed many other people, including the daughters of the people who hurt him in the first place and who did terrible things to him, or people that he transferred the blame for the death of Kathy onto and lashed out at them and the daughters, and beat woman after woman after woman, and he is destroying himself, and he's destroying the people around him in the place that he's come out of in his grief about all of it. And when I look at this, I just feel a kind of disdain for classical romance on this basis, because Emily Bronte didn't need to come out and say, she doesn't need, basically, as a reader, a lot of what we come in and take away from a lot of these fiction books ends up being individualized interpretation, and it's entirely subjective. And also, a lot of the things that we pull out of it, are implied in subtext. They're not actually mentioned in the book in these books at all. Nobody, but they don't have. But an author shouldn't have to come straight out and say it, to walk away with an interpretation like this. Classical romance and its fatal flaw is that it almost always ends up reading as a case. It almost always ends up reading in a very conservative fashion. It comes across as the author saying love will destroy you, and so we should keep marriages for the sake of convenience, and that we should do nothing to change our society or the definition of this, and we should stay with the old definition where, marriages are arranged, and that families, that's a person who writes a book like Wuthering Heights doesn't come straight out and say that, but through making erotic love, look like this thing that will destroy you, and make you destroy other people and put them through hell, all of that, all of it jumbled into what it ends up being, ends up coming across in this fashion. It ends up coming across as an advocate for arranged marriages, because if love will destroy you, why not? Fuck it, avoid it at all costs. This is they read like cautionary tales against eroticized love in the first place, and none of this in practice actually squares with my own experience of it. Any woman that I have fallen in love with has made me ultimately a better person who is less inclined, to lash out at other people. They did not ruin me. They didn't make me ruin myself. They guided me towards better decisions and dulled some of the more reactive and reckless sides of myself, and gave me a reason to behave in a cautious fashion, so that restraining my worser impulses. They awoken the greater angels of my nature. They didn't cause me to go down a dark rabbit hole like Heathcliff. But, they didn't destroy me. It didn't. These cautionary tales just proved to be, the bitter whining of worrywarts who didn't understand anything at the end of the day. And so I actually hate, broadly speaking, classical romance. I'm not a fan of it anymore. I think, these books suck. They're just cautionary tales telling you don't fall in love, it will ruin you.